The chain of tragedies begins with what seemed like a harmless lie from Leslie, a story she had told and retold to herself so many times that she eventually believed it was the truth. From the moment she decided to stare directly into Ted's fear and turn it into leverage, the lives of everyone orbiting around them began sliding downhill. Ted already carried within him the guilt of a man who had missed too many things in his past, from the times he was absent during important family moments to the bad decisions he made along his career path. Leslie saw the invisible cracks hidden beneath his polished exterior and chose to drive a knife into them. She told Ted the story of Eva, of a distant night whose details he no longer remembered clearly, and then gently planted in his mind the idea that Eva might be his biological daughter. Ted believed it not only because the story sounded plausible, but because he had always believed he was bad enough to have made any number of mistakes he couldn't remember. That misplaced trust became the first foundation on which his marriage to Nicole began to fracture in silence. Ted started looking at Eva with different eyes, guilty, tender, and confused all at once. He tried to hide that turmoil, but in a home already full of emotional voids, even the smallest changes became glaringly obvious. Nicole was not blind. She sensed the growing distance between herself and her husband, but she could not guess its source. She only felt as if some ghost was slipping between them. At the same time, Leslie continued her story on another front. With Eva, she saw in Eva's eyes the hunger to belong, the instability of someone who had grown up never quite knowing where she truly started. By telling Eva that Ted was her father, Leslie did more than give her daughter an answer. She placed herself in the position of the sole gatekeeper of the truth about Eva's origins. Everything seemed perfectly arranged. Ted, weighed down by guilt, now had even more reason to take responsibility and atone by caring for Eva as his own child. Eva, starved for a sense of belonging, clung to Ted's image as an anchor. Nicole, without understanding the story behind it all, was pushed into the role of the woman becoming increasingly unnecessary in her own marriage. And Leslie reaped her reward. She stepped deeper into the world of Fairmont Crest, moving closer to the gates of power she had once only dared to admire from afar. But what Leslie failed to foresee was that, in this carefully constructed game, there was still one person who refused to let the truth stay buried forever. Peaches. Peaches, the close friend, the woman carrying a ticking clock inside her with a terminal illness, was the only one who clearly saw the devastation Leslie's lie was causing. She watched Ted slowly lose what little peace he had left, watched Eva naively cling to an answer built on uncertainty, watched Nicole move from suspicion to self-blame, then shrink herself down so she would not become a burden to anyone. In the end, while Leslie chose to protect her power by clinging to deception, Peaches chose to protect what little remained of human dignity with the truth. She urged Ted to take a DNA test, not to destroy him, but to free him from the invisible prison Leslie had built around him. She told him he deserved to know who he was really living with and what he was actually trying to make up for. At the same time, Peaches went to Eva and gently pulled away the fake foundation Leslie had laid beneath her feet by telling her that not everything her mother believed and repeated was the truth. When the test results came back, Eva was not Ted's daughter. The cruel irony was that Ted's pain did not come from losing a biological child. Deep down, he had already prepared himself for that possibility. His pain lay in the fact that he had already grown to love this bond, had already begun to see Eva as a part of his life, and was now being forced to face the feeling of having his right to continue loving her under the newly accepted label yanked away. He felt like an actor being dragged off stage halfway through the play, just when the role had seeped into his blood. Eva, meanwhile, shattered from the inside. She realized that once again, the concept of family in her life had been ripped to pieces. She withdrew from both Ted and Leslie, like someone burned too badly to risk touching anything that might hurt her again. When Leslie discovered that Peaches was the one behind the test, she went almost mad. She felt betrayed not only by her friend, but by the entire system of lies she had painstakingly constructed. In Leslie's eyes, Peaches was not a woman telling the truth out of conscience. but the person who had smashed the only bridge tying Leslie to everything she had always craved: recognition, belonging, and a central place in the web of relationships. That loss of control pushed Leslie into a dangerous state. She began lashing out at anyone who refused to follow her script, using emotion, guilt, and old secrets to keep each person within her grasp. Yet the tighter she tried to hold on, the farther everyone drifted away. Peaches accepted the price of truth, watching Leslie spiral downward. With a broken heart, but knowing there was no path back. If the story had ended with Eva, things might still have been somewhat manageable. But when Ted faced Eva's test results, he realized he could no longer live based on emotional assumptions. The doubt he had long buried about Kat, the daughter he'd always believed was his, rose violently to the surface. Without telling anyone, without asking Nicole a single question, Ted quietly ordered a DNA test for Kat as well. He told himself it was only to be sure, that he needed some absolute, unshakable truth to cling to in the storm that was gathering. But when the paper came back with the words "no match," Ted's world completely collapsed. In an instant, he did not just lose one child in name, he lost the very foundation of the family he had once taken pride in. Eva was not his daughter. Kat was not either. The image of the devoted father he had projected to the world turned out to be built on sand. Despair swallowed him, but what hurt the most was not the betrayal. It was the cold question that sank its claws into him. If everything was a lie, did the love he had given those two girls still mean anything, or had it all been just a role he had unwittingly accepted? This time, Ted did not choose silence. He realized that staying silent was just another way of letting himself be controlled by other people's stories. He went to Nicole, laid the DNA results on the table, and forced her to face the question they had both avoided for years. Nicole initially reacted like a woman mortally insulted. She carried the pride of someone who had sacrificed her career and reputation to keep the family together, only to now be accused by a cold laboratory report. She wanted to believe that Ted had been poisoned by Leslie's manipulations, that he no longer trusted his wife the way he once did. But when she saw the numbers, when she realized Ted had tested both Eva and Kat, the moral armor she had wrapped around herself began to crack. The past Nicole had buried resurfaced like a long-dead body rising from the bottom of a lake. When Kat was born, her marriage to Ted had already been broken for a long time. Ted was rarely home, his mind consumed by ambition and the pressure of proving himself worthy of his place in Fairmont Crest. In her loneliness and despair, Nicole had lost herself once in the arms of another man, a brief affair she had assumed would dissolve like smoke. She had never intended to lie to Ted for a lifetime. But then Kat grew up, and the way that child looked at Ted, so clear, so full of trust, made it impossible for Nicole to speak. Every time she tried to open her mouth to confess, that image strangled the words in her throat. Year after year, her choice to remain silent became a habit, and then a sentence she voluntarily imposed on herself. The confrontation between Ted and Nicole was no longer just a marital argument. It became a moral trial where both were forced to face the worst versions of themselves. Ted had to admit that he had stopped being the solid shoulder Nicole could lean on, that the distance he had created back then had opened the door for someone else to step in. Nicole had to accept that she had chosen the easier path for herself, silence, allowing Ted to keep playing the role of perfect father without ever being given the right to choose. In that moment, they both recognized a painful truth. Neither of them was entirely innocent. The truth about Kat spread like an oil stain. For Kat, her life suddenly turned into a play scripted by adults, where even her name and family tree were nothing more than props. She looked at her parents, those former pillars of her world, as two strangers who had just demolished everything she believed in with a single sheet of paper. In her fury, Kat was not only reacting to the lies but also to the feeling of having been a pawn in a war between grown-ups. She declared that she needed none of them, and walked out of the house already echoing with the ghosts of so many secrets. When Kat stepped through the gates of Fairmont Crest, She was not only leaving a luxurious compound, she was stepping out of the last thin shell of protection and into a world where opportunists were already waiting. A rootless heiress. The legal daughter on paper of a man with status and ties to countless political and social forces, was always an alluring target. The enemies of the Dupree family, the people resentful of Fairmont Crest's world, did not miss their chance. Kat was drawn into all-night parties and crowds that promised her freedom, while quietly stripping away every piece of information they could about her family. The feeling of finally being herself quickly turned into an intricate trap in which she was used as a living weapon, a vulnerability through which her entire bloodline could be attacked. Meanwhile, the DNA shock led Eva to choose a different path. She did not scream. She did not demand immediate answers. Instead, Eva left Fairmont Crest quietly, carrying a small suitcase and a single question: who am I if every map of my bloodline is wrong? She stepped out of the world polished by money and prestige, into neighborhoods Leslie and Ted had always pretended did not exist. There, Eva began to trace her mother's past, seeking out the men who had drifted through Leslie's chaotic years. Each meeting became a distorted mirror reflecting another facet of who Leslie had really been. A failed musician remembering an ambitious girl who left him the moment a better opportunity appeared. A bartender who had loved Leslie with rare sincerity but was abandoned without a word. A dangerous player who specialized in exploiting desperate women and remembered Leslie as nothing more than another name on a list. Eva gradually realized that identifying who her father was might not bring salvation at all. It might only open more layers of filth her mother had tried to bury. She understood that the man who shared her blood might very well be the last person she would ever want to claim, and that realization made her search for identity even more bitter. While Eva disappeared, Fairmont Crest became the eye of the storm. Rumors about an illegitimate daughter, DNA tests, and a child who wasn't really his spilled out of tea-time gossip and into tabloid pages, then even crept into mainstream news. Everyone who had ever been connected to Leslie, from donors to powerful men, was dragged into suspicion. Ted faced the media, bombarded with questions about whether he regretted ever acknowledging Eva as his child. Nicole was interrogated by the hospital board about letting her chaotic private life damage her professional credibility. Leslie, stretched to breaking, was trapped between her fear that Eva would dig too deeply into her dark past and her fear that her daughter would be hurt by the same whirlpools she herself had barely escaped. On the sidelines, Peaches was the only one who no longer had time to run. In her final days, she prayed for Eva's safety while watching Kat drift into the hands of people with bad intentions, her heart twisting with pain. She understood better than anyone that Eva was retracing Leslie's path from years ago, while Kat was turning into a more vulnerable version of Ted, torn between who she really was and the roles others had forced upon her. But this time, there was no one fully free or clear-headed enough to protect them completely. The story corners every character. Ted and Nicole are forced to set aside their personal wounds to search for Kat together, no longer as husband and wife but as two co-offenders in guilt trying to rescue a victim from the consequences of their choices. They know this journey is not just about bringing Kat back to a house. It is about trying to prove to themselves that they still deserve to be called her parents, even if the title of biological parent has been stripped away. Leslie must decide whether she dares to confront her past and go after Eva, allowing her daughter to see her stripped bare and fragile, or whether she will keep hiding in an empty house, screaming about betrayal without doing anything to make amends. The latent climax lies in the fact that, on Eva's journey, a prime suspect for the role of her biological father emerges, a man directly connected to the forces currently at war with the Dupree family. If that turns out to be true, Eva will not just be a child lost between two worlds. She could become a bridge or a fuse between two opposing sides. At that point, the question is no longer simply who does Eva belong to, but rather, if her biological father turns out to be the enemy of the very family that, however wrongly, loved her from the beginning, will she choose blood or choose the people who stood beside her through every tragedy? The future of Ted, Nicole, Leslie, Eva, and Kat hangs on a thin line between truth and the instinct to protect themselves. They have stripped away every layer of deceit. But seeing the truth does not mean they know how to live with it. In the world of Fairmont Crest, where every secret has a price, the only choice left is not to return to some peaceful past, but to decide whether they will use the truth to save one another, or keep turning it into a weapon that destroys them all.